He did not marry her for love. He married her because a lieutenant had died in the Rye at Quatre Bras with one hand fisted in his colonel's collar, spending the last breath he owned on a favor. Honora Thorne was 29 years old, owed 11 weeks of rent, and had 7 days left before she became a paid companion in Scarborough. Lucian Fenwick was a duke and had not slept a night through since 1812. It was meant to be a transaction, a roof in exchange for a conscience. She would be fed, and he would be left alone, and neither of them would ever have to explain to the other why they woke at 4 in the morning with their hands shaking. But nobody told her what she was actually being bought for. Not the duke, who could not make himself say it. Not the attorney, who was paid rather well not to. She would find it herself 3 weeks later in the estate ledgers in a small quarterly payment to a physician for the care of a patient who was not ill. August of 1816 was the coldest August in living memory. The wheat stood black and unharvested from Kent to the Scottish border. Bread went up by the week, and in a lodging house south of the river, a woman stood holding her dead brother's shirts, calculating very calmly how little she had left to sell. There were 4 of them. 2 were past mending. Honora Thorne sorted them into 2 heaps: sell, keep. Then she put the keep heap in with the others because sentiment cost 6 pence a night in this house. The room smelled of wet plaster and the fat the landlady rendered on Fridays. Rain came off the tannery roof opposite in a gray sheet, and the light through the window was the light of November, although it was the 11th of August. She was 29. Her hair was the color of wet sacking. Her jaw was too square, and her eyes assessed people before she could stop them. She had £2, 4 shillings a pocket watch that no longer ran, and a silver Waterloo medal that had come by post that spring, issued to the next of kin when the man himself was not available to receive it. Gideon had not been available. He had been dead 14 months. On the washstand lay the letter that had come that morning. The agents required before the arrears of pay and the share of prize money due to the late Lieutenant G. Thorne could be released satisfactory proof of the relationship of the claimant to the deceased. A certificate of baptism was the customary form. The parish, where they had both been christened, where their father had stood in the pulpit 19 years, had burned in 1809, vestry, register chest, and all. The sum in dispute was £34 and some shillings. It was the difference between a woman with a small independence and a woman who fetched a deaf dowager's shawls for £20 a year in her keep. Nora opened a notebook she had sewn herself out of the blank backs of her father's old sermons and turned to the page she had headed in April. Places a copy may exist. She had learned over 14 months of being told no by men with clean cuffs. One useful fact: it did not matter what was true. It mattered what was written down and where and whether the person holding the pen could be reached. The knock came at 3:30. Nora did not get up. Mrs. Prentice knocked like a woman collecting a debt because she was one. Tuesday, Nora called. "I am selling my brother's shirts tomorrow, and you will have it on Tuesday." The door opened. The man in the doorway had to duck to come in, and even then he did not quite fit. His boots had been polished that morning by a man whose whole employment was polishing them, and they had carried one wet plain leaf up 2 flights of stairs and set it down on her rug like an accusation. Nora put the shirts on the trunk and stood. "Your Grace," she said. Lucian Fenwick did not bow. He looked at her for rather longer than was civil, and she looked back, and what she saw did not match the tailoring. The skin under his eyes was bruised violet. There was a stillness to him that was not calm, the stillness of a man holding something level. I had been Gideon's colonel. He had been, according to a chaplain's note from Brussels, the man who had held her brother in the Rye. "Miss Thorne," he said. His voice was scraped raw at the bottom. "Have your things packed by 6. Nora blinked. "I beg your pardon. Your arrears are paid. Your notice is given. You are not staying here." She folded her arms and set her feet. "I am obliged to you for the charity," she said. "I am not taking it. I have a place in Scarborough for Michaelmas. You will be reading psalms to a woman who cannot hear them and walking a dog that does not like you. Probably. For £20. 22, said Nora, and I keep the dog's license money, which I am told is where the real profit lies." He did not laugh. Something moved at the corner of his mouth and went out again. Your brother asked me to see to you. My brother is dead, she said. It came out harder than she meant. Grief had made her cruel in small, unpredictable bursts, the way a hearth throws a coal. He did not flinch. The skin tightened round his eyes and stayed tight. I am aware of it, he said. I carried the coffin. But there was a moment on the 16th of June when I told him something, and I would prefer to be a man who meant it. So you have paid a landlady. Consider yourself discharged. He crossed to the window instead of answering, and she understood that he was doing it so he did not have to look at her while he said the next part. Marry me, he said. The rain went on. Somewhere below, a cart went over the cobbles with a barrel loose in the bed of it, and the barrel knocked twice. You are not well said, Nora. I am extremely clear. He turned round. I need a wife. There must be an heir or the title goes sideways to my cousin, and I have no appetite for the season or for being introduced to 17-year-old girls by their mothers between the acts. You need a house and an income and a name that stops men in offices putting your letters at the bottom of the pile. I would rather not dress it as anything else. It was, she thought afterwards, the most honest thing any man had said to her in a decade, and it was still a lie, and she did not yet know which part. I am not handsome, and I am not biddable, she said. And if you are hoping for a quiet house, you have come to the wrong staircase. I am not hoping for anything, said the Duke of Warrow. That is rather the point. Nora looked at him a long moment. She had eaten nothing but bread and dripping for 3 days, and had stopped noticing, which frightened her more than the hunger had. But that was not what decided it, and she was honest enough with herself even then to know it. What decided it was the 2 footmen she could see from the window standing in the rain, because a man like this could afford to keep 2 men standing in the rain. Men like that walked into an agent's office in Craig's Court and were seen the same morning. £34, she thought. I have a condition, she said. He raised an eyebrow. There is money owing to my brother. Arrears and prize. The agents will not pay it because our parish register burned, and I cannot prove I am his sister. I do not want you to pay me the sum. I want the use of your name and your paper and your franking privilege until I have got it out of them myself. For the first time, the Duke looked directly at her, rather than through her. £34, he said. And some shillings, said Nora. I intend to have the shillings. Something happened in his face that she could not name. It was gone before she could. Agreed, he said. Then I will be packed by 6, said Nora, and went to find her valise and did not let herself think about the shirts until she was 3 streets away, and it was too late to go back for them. The settlement was executed 4 days later in chambers off Chancery Lane, in a room that smelled of coal smoke and sealing wax. Mr. Ossian Threlkeld was 46 small and exquisitely clean. He had been attorney to the Fenwicks 11 years, and he had the manner of a good servant in a house where the family had stopped noticing the furniture. He laid out the deeds and turned them towards the Duke. Lucian signed without reading. Nora watched his hand as he did it. It was not steady. He got through his own name the way a man gets through a doorway he has misjudged and put the pen down too hard. There was a third man at the table introduced as Mr. Crispin Fenwick, past 40, sandy heavy about the shoulders, dressed with a decent economy that had recently become economy of another kind. He had a black band on his hat and had not said 6 words since arriving. Mr. Fenwick, said Threlkeld pleasantly, as trustee, here and here. Crispin Fenwick took the pen and signed twice. He did not read either. Nora watched him do it and thought, without much charity, that she was in a room with 2 men who signed things and one who wrote them, and that she knew which of the 3 she would rather be. Then Threlkeld turned the last sheaf towards her and said, purely as a courtesy, since her signature was not required and could have no effect whatever, that her grace might wish to glance over the schedules. She read them, all of them. What is the second schedule, she said. Threlkeld smiled. It was a pleasant smile entirely, without contempt, which was itself the contempt. A. Trifle your grace, the Netherfold parcel. Home farm, the barn granary, and some 40 acres on the beck settled to your sole and separate use with Mr. Fenwick as trustee. In the usual form. Pin money. Every settlement carries one. It saves a great deal of unpleasantness later regarding dower. 40 acres, said Nora. And the granary said Threlcold, which I am told wants a new roof. She looked at the page a moment longer. To her sole and separate use. The word sounded like a small kindness, and she had learned to be suspicious of small kindnesses, but had not yet learned why. She let it go. Threlcold tied the deeds with green tape, and at the door he handed the Duke his hat and said in the tone of a man remarking on the weather that the marriage came at a very opportune moment. Lucian said nothing at all. They were married on the 20th of August in an empty church in Mayfair, before the incumbent, the clerk, and a woman who had come in out of the rain. There were no flowers. The ring was too large and cold as a coin. He did not kiss her, and she was surprised to find that she noticed. They went north the same afternoon, and it took 4 days. It was the end of August, and the wheat was still standing. At Doncaster the bread was 11 pence, the quartern loaf, and there was a constable outside the baker's doing nothing, which meant somebody had thought it worth paying him to stand there. They exchanged perhaps 200 words in 4 days. Are you warm enough? Quite, thank you. We change at Ferry Bridge. Very well. On the third evening at an inn near Bawtry, she woke at 2 in the morning to a sound through the wall. It was not words. It was a man arguing with something in the dark, low and level and unbroken, and then stopping suddenly as though a hand had been put over it. In the morning he came down shaved and steady and asked whether she had slept well. Ellerbeck Hall stood at the head of the valley with the moor coming down black behind it, and it was not a house. It was a statement made in gritstone by somebody who wanted to be seen making it. 4 stories, 22 windows across the front stone, the color of a wet flagstone. Nothing about it faced the sun. It faced the road. The servants were out on the steps in 2 lines before the carriage stopped, which meant somebody had been watching the drive with a glass. Mrs. Otley, the housekeeper, was 57 and wore her keys the way a sergeant wears a sash. Her eyes went in one economical sweep over Nora's blue gown, her bare hands, the absence of any maid, and the single scuffed valise a footman was lifting down and clearly did not know what to do with. Nora lifted her chin and let her look. "Show her Grace up," said Lucian, already turning away. "I shall be in the estate room. I am not to be disturbed." She was given the Duchess's apartments, which were enormous, and had not been aired since the last Duchess died in them in 1801. Nora stood in the middle of the carpet and understood that she had exchanged a loud poverty for a quiet one, and that nobody here was going to tell her which was worse. They dined that night at a table 32 feet long. He sat at one end and she at the other, and between them stood a silver epergne the size of a font arranged so that from her chair she could see her husband's left shoulder and one hand. 4 footmen stood against the wall. The clock in the corner had a very loud escapement. "Is the pheasant not to your liking?" said a voice from the far end of the room. Nora put down her fork. "The pheasant is excellent," she said. "It is the distance I object to." A pause. The hand set down its knife. Then the shoulder shifted, and he leaned sideways to look round the epergne, and for the first time she saw his whole face at dinner. "I beg your pardon. You are sitting in another county," said Nora. "If I wanted the salt, I should have to send a boy. My mother and father dined at this table for 31 years. Then they had remarkable voices," said Nora, and stood up. The nearest footman moved to draw her chair, and she was already past it. She picked up her glass and walked the length of the room, and her heels went very clearly on the boards, and 4 footmen watched her do it with the fixed expressions of men who would be discussing it in the servants' hall within the hour. She stopped at the chair on the Duke's right hand, put the glass down on the cloth, and sat. Lucian Fenwick went absolutely still in the manner of a man who has had something set down beside his plate that may or may not have a fuse in it. "There," said Nora, shaking out her napkin. "Now neither of us has to shout. Do you manage this estate yourself, or do you keep an agent who does the work?" He did not speak for what felt like a very long time. "I keep an agent," he said at last. "He is not good." "Then I should like to see the books." "The books?" "The estate books and the house books," said Nora, "and any bank account you are willing to show me. I ran a lodging-house budget for a widow in Southwark for 3 years, your grace. I can add. And I will not spend 40 years in this house doing embroidery and waiting to die of it." Something crossed his face. It was there and gone, and she was almost certain it had been fear. Very well, he said. Tomorrow. It took her 3 weeks. The books at Ellerbeck were not dishonest. What was in them was worse money going out of the house in a steady, untroubled stream in the exact amounts it had gone out in 1810, because nobody had ever written down an instruction to stop. £410 a year to a house in Harley Street standing empty since 1813. Wine at a rate that appalled her until she found the cellar book and discovered it was in fact being drunk, all of it in one room by one man. She cut the imports and reduced the rents of 11 tenants whose ground had gone underwater twice in 2 years. The agent appealed to the Duke, and the Duke said without lifting his eyes from the fire, "Do as she likes." It was 11:15 in the morning. It was in the 3rd week that she found the payment. It was in the private ledger rather than the estate ledger, which was why it had taken her so long, and it appeared 4 times a year like a rent. Dr. A. Pell of Huddersfield. Attendance and report, 6 guineas. Nora sat back. 6 guineas quarterly was not a doctor's bill. 6 guineas on the quarter days was a retainer, and a retainer is paid for a service that is continuous. She turned back 4 years. It was there in 1815 and 1814 and 1813. It went back to the March quarter of 1812, and in 1812 the Duke of Warrow had not been in England at all. She found Mrs. Otley in the still room and asked who Dr. Pell was. The housekeeper put down a jar of quince very carefully on the shelf, got the lid straight, and said that she was sure she could not say, and that she had the linen to see to, and left. Then she went to find her husband. I was in the estate room with the shutters half closed and a decanter at his elbow. And when she came in and shut the door behind her, he looked up and she watched him read her face, and she watched him decide not to lie. "Who is Dr. Pell?" she said. Lucian Fenwick set his glass down. "A physician in Huddersfield," he said. "He keeps a private madhouse on the Wakefield Road, 11 beds. 6 of them are gentlemen whose families pay for their keep by the year." "Why are you paying him?" "I am not paying him to treat me," he said. "I am paying him to sign nothing." Nora did not move. "There is a petition," said the Duke. "It has been 3 years getting up. It asks the Lord Chancellor to issue a commission de lunatico inquirendo. 12 men are sworn in an inn in the county and asked one question: whether I am of sound mind and capable of the government of myself and my estate. And if they say you are not, then the estate goes to a committee appointed by the Court of Chancery, and it stays there as long as I live, and every rent and every repair in this valley is settled by a clerk in London who has never seen it, and I am put somewhere quiet." He looked at the glass. "Dr. Pell keeps 11 beds. He would be delighted." "A duke who is unmarried and has no child," she said slowly, "and who sees nobody, and who cries out in the night in an inn at Bawtry loudly enough to wake the next room." "Yes, whereas a duke with a wife." "Whereas a duke with a wife," said Lucian Fenwick, "who may reasonably be expected to have a son, is a great deal more expensive to pull down." "Yes." The silence went on. "I kept my word to your brother," he said at last, "and I also used you. Both things are true, and I have known it since the 4th of August, and you are entitled to make of that whatever you like." Nora found that her hands were quite steady, which surprised her. "Who is bringing it?" she said. "My cousin," said the Duke. "Crispin." "The man who signed the settlement," said Nora. "Without reading it," said Lucian. "Yes." She thought about that for a moment, and then she asked the question she had come in with because she had not in fact had an answer to it. "When did you begin paying Dr. Pell?" "When I came home," he said. "Threlkeld advised it. He said a physician of good standing who has been retained by the family cannot afterwards be retained against it." It seemed sensible. Nora said nothing. "What?" said Lucian. "The payments begin in the March quarter of 1812, she said. 3 years before you came home. Somebody in this house was paying that man while you were sitting in front of Badajoz, and it was not you." The Duke looked at her. "Then it was Crispin," he said. "He had the running of the place while I was gone. He had every book and every key in the valley for 7 years. "Perhaps," said Nora, and she went away and wrote it down. Crispin Fenwick came on the 8th of October, and he did not come like a man laying siege. He came like a man visiting a house he had lived in, and he brought his daughter. Miss Cecily Fenwick was 19 and had a habit of filling silences, which in that house was a service. Your Grace, said Crispin Fenwick, and bowed properly, and did not look at her gown. At dinner, he asked no questions of Nora at all. He asked them of Lucian. What did the Upper Valley yield this year, he said. Lucian said that it had been a poor year everywhere. I know it was a poor year, said Crispin without heat. I am asking what it yielded. In quarters from the 12 farms above the beck. Lucian did not answer. How many tenancies are there now, said Crispin. Lucian looked at his plate. Who is your agent, said Crispin. His name, said Lucian, and stopped. Nora watched the whole thing happen. Crispin Fenwick did not raise his voice, or press, or repeat. He asked 3 questions, to which a man in possession of his own estate would know the answers, received nothing, and let it lie. He is not scoring, Nora thought. He is taking a note. Cecily talked about a concert in Halifax. Nora said when asked that she did not play the pianoforte. Not at all, Your Grace, said Cecily with real surprise. Not a note, said Nora. I keep the household books instead. Cecily laughed. Crispin Fenwick smiled into his glass, and Nora liked him for it, and distrusted herself immediately for liking him. Later, when Lucian had gone to the estate room and the girl had been sent up, Crispin found her in the passage by the stairs. May I say something disagreeable to you, he said. I imagine you will. He turned his hat around in his hands once. I love this place, he said. I ran it for 7 years while he was in Spain, and I have not been consulted once since he came home. Then, what is your grievance? There are 411 families in this valley, said Crispin Fenwick. I know because I counted them. They will get through this winter on somebody's judgment. He looked at her steadily. And I have just sat at that table for 2 hours and watched a man who cannot tell me the name of his own agent. Nora said nothing. I take no pleasure in it, he said. He was the best of us. I would give a good deal for it not to be true. It was Cecily who gave her the first loose thread, and she gave it the way useful things are always given by accident. It is all the Halifax Bank, said Cecily. They shut their doors in June, and Papa had everything with them, and Mr. Threlkeld says the creditors may be brought to terms if we are patient. Mr. Threlkeld comes to you often, said Nora. Oh, forever, said Cecily cheerfully. He has been coming to us since I was a child. He dined with us the night the news came about Papa's brother, and that was 1811. So I must have been 14, and I remember because he gave me a shilling and told me not to spend it. Nora stopped walking, made herself start again, and said something about the Espaliers. Since 1811, which was before the Duke of Warrow came home and before Dr. Pell was paid his first 6 guineas, and which meant nothing at all except that a family attorney visited a family. She wrote it in the notebook that night and looked at the 2 pages together for a long time. They rode out on the 15th of October to see the Upper Valley. Nora had not sat on a horse since she was 12 and had not thought it worth mentioning. She was given a gray mare of unnecessary size, and she took the reins with the grip of a woman holding a rope over water. You look terrified, said Lucian. I am calculating, said Nora without turning her head. Calculating what? The drop, she said. If I break my neck, you will have to find another spinster to do the books, and I am told they are scarce this year. There was a noise from the Duke. It was the first time she had heard him laugh, and it was a bad laugh, the way a hinge is bad when it has not been opened since the spring. Heels down, he said, and looked away. The oats had gone down flat in September and lain in the wet, and the ears had sprouted in the head. Lucian dismounted at the 4th farm and questioned the tenant for 20 minutes, and Nora watched. Howe was not gentle, but he never once required the man to take his hat off. And when the tenant said, with his eyes on the ground, that his eldest girl had not had white bread since Lammas, the Duke said that is not to happen again, and wrote it in a pocketbook. The tenant's name was Jonas Sowerby. He was 39 and had hands like a man 20 years older, and there was a pale band across his palm where something had been held every day for 20 years and was no longer held. You were a cropper, said Nora before she could stop herself. Sowerby looked at his hand. Cloth dresser, ma'am. Aye, 19 years. And now? Now there's a gig mill at Honley, does in a day what 4 of us did in a week, he said. I sold my shears in March, bought seed potatoes with it. He looked at the flattened oats. Then it rained till August. They came back over the shoulder of the moor, and the weather came down on them in 20 minutes. The Duke had turned his horse before she knew he had moved. His arm came round her ribs and took her weight entirely, and she was hauled across his saddle. Are you hurt? He said. She felt it in his chest before she heard it. No. Put me down, I am perfectly. He did not put her down. He got his boot out and caught the mare's rein and locked his other arm round her waist. Do not be a fool, he said. You are wet through and it is 4 miles. They came down off the moor like that in the hail. In the stable yard he swung down first and reached up for her and set her on her feet and did not step back. They stood in the hail breathing. His hands were still at her waist. He was looking at her mouth and had been for some seconds. The head groom coughed. Lucian let go of her as though she had gone hot and stepped away, and the whole apparatus of the Duke came back down over his face like a portcullis. Go in, he said. Get dry. I shall dine at 7. He walked off into the weather, and Nora stood in the yard with her heart going like a bird in a box and the hail melting in her collar. Mr. Threlkeld came up from London in the first week of November with a proposal, and it was a good one. He laid it out in the estate room with a map and a sheet of figures. The Netherfold granary held 1,100 quarters of the 1815 wheat, which was sound. Under the Act of 1815, no foreign wheat could come into the country at all until the home price reached 80 shillings the quarter. It will touch 100 by Lady Day, said Threlkeld. Held until March, that granary is worth £4,000. Lucian sat with his hand over his mouth and looked at the map. Do as you think best, said the Duke at last. Nora looked at her husband and saw that he was not there. He had gone somewhere behind his own eyes about 90 seconds ago, and he had taken the decision with him. Threlkeld gathered his papers with perfect courtesy and left, and did not once look at Nora, and she understood afterwards that this had been the only false note in the entire performance, and that she had missed it. She went down to Netherfold on the 12th of November with the granary key. She sent to the 6 nearest farms, and by 2 o'clock there were 19 men and 4 women in the barn doorway with their caps in their hands, not knowing what they had been called for. The granary is open from today, she said. Wheat at 52 shillings the quarter, which is what it stood at in June. Sowerby will keep the tally. There was a silence of a particular kind. Then a woman at the back began to cry, without any noise at all, and that was worse than if she had made some. Nora signed the head of the page herself, Honora Warrow, her own hand in her own name for the first time in her life on a document that did anything. She rode back up the valley in the dark, feeling, for about 17 days, better than she had felt since 1815. The article was served on the 28th of November. Nora read it at the estate room table with a candle at her elbow, while her husband stood at the window with his back to her and did not read it at all. Article the first. That the said Duke has since the year 1815 wholly withdrawn from society, has not taken his seat, and receives no person. Article the second. That the said Duke is subject to nightly paroxysms, witnessed by his own servants, in which he does not know the persons about him. Article the third. That the said Duke's judgment in matters of business is defective and has been so since his return from the peninsula. Article the fourth. That the said Duke has this November suffered the granary at Netherfold, being the property of the estate, and containing 1,100 quarters of merchantable wheat, to be given away in a season of dearth at a price 15 shillings under the market, to the loss of the estate of not less than £2,000, which is the act of a man incapable of the government of his property. Nora read Article the fourth 3 times. Then she put the paper down and said in a voice she did not recognize that this was hers, that she had gone down there with the key and opened the book and signed the head of the page herself, and that she would say so in writing to anybody they liked. Lucian did not turn round. It will not answer, he said. It is the truth. It is the truth, and it is worth nothing. You cannot say so. Not in writing, and not on oath, and not in any room in England where it would signify. Why? Because you are my wife, he said, and turned round. A married woman has no separate existence in law. Everything she does as me. There is no Honora Warrow. Whatever you did at Netherfold on the 12th of November, the law of England says that I did it, and there is no form of words by which either of us can say otherwise. Nora sat quite still and felt the floor of the world tilt. So they will hang it on you, she said. They will hang it on me, said Lucian Fenwick, because you fed 400 families. Yes. It rained 11 days after that, and she did not sleep well in any of them. On the 9th of December, she went into the library at 11 at night to find a county map and found her husband asleep in the chair by the dead fire with a decanter beside him at the 2/3 mark. On his knee, held loosely in one hand, was a Japan tin dispatch box with the lid up. She had seen it before on his desk closed. She came closer, meaning only to take it off his lap before it fell. In the box was a silver Waterloo medal on a crimson riband with a broad blue edge, exactly like the one in her own valise, and under it a folded sheet of paper the color of a dirty floor. His hand came off the arm of the chair and closed round her wrist. Nora made a sound. His grip was appalling. His eyes were open, and they were not looking at her. They were looking through her at something about 100 yards behind her head, and his face was the face of a man watching a thing arrive that he cannot stop. "Not the line," he said. "Tell them not the line. Not with cavalry on the flank, tell them." Lucian said Nora very clearly, because she had learned this from a woman in Southwark whose husband had come back from the sea. "It is Honora. You are at Ellerbeck. It is December, and it is raining." He blinked twice. Then the room came back into his eyes, and he saw his own hand around her wrist, and he let go of it as though it had burned him and went backwards into the chair. "God," he said. "God. Beg your pardon. I was. I know what you were." She rubbed her wrist. She did not step back. She looked down at the open box. "Whose is that?" He did not answer. Nora took out the folded sheet and opened it, and her hands knew the writing before her eyes did. It was Gideon's. The first 2/3 were in ink dated the 15th of June, 1815, from the road above, Braine-le-Comte, cheerful, badly spelled, full of a captain who owed him money. The last 4 lines were in pencil. They had been written across the bottom and up the margin by a man in a great hurry, and the paper had mud in the creases and a broad, dark brown stain across one corner that had come out of somebody and dried a long time ago. 4:30. "We are in square and have been 3 times. Colonel has the order to deploy into line, and I have told him to his face, the cuirassiers are still on our right, and if we deploy they will have us in 90 seconds. He has given the order in his own voice. I am to take the left company out. If I don't come off this field, do not let Nora go into the workhouse. She is too proud to ask and too clever to be pitied." Nora stood in the library with the paper in her hand and understood 2 things in about 4 seconds, and it was the second that made her put her hand on the back of the chair. The first was that the man in front of her had given the order that killed her brother. The second was that she was holding the most dangerous document in England. It was not a memory, and it was not a rumor. It was a statement in the hand of a dead officer, made in the field at the moment that the Duke of Warrow had been told what would happen, and had done it anyway. Article the 3rd. That the said Duke's judgment in matters of business is defective and has been so since his return from the peninsula. Put that paper in front of 12 men in an inn at Wakefield, and Article the 3rd would prove itself. She was holding the knife and the shield at the same time, and they were the same object. Nora folded it along its old creases. Lucian was watching her. "Now you know," he said. "Yes," said Nora, and put it inside her bodice, and did not tell him what else she knew. The vestry met on the 12th of December in the church at Ellerbeck, because there was nowhere else in the parish that would hold them. The poor rate was going from 4 shillings in the pound to 6, and 40 men had come out in the sleet to say they could not pay it. Nora sat at the back in the Warrow pew alone. Mr. Ossian Threlkeld was there as attorney to the estate, and he was as always useful. And then he said in exactly the same helpful tone that before the vestry closed there was one matter he was bound to mention, since several ratepayers had asked him privately. "There is a question about the Netherfold granary," he said. 1,100 quarters were disposed of last month at 15 shillings under the market, and as this parish is being asked for 2 shillings more in the pound, this quarter the ratepayers are entitled to know upon what principle that was done and by whose direction. Every head in the church turned. Nora came half out of the pew. Lucian Fenwick stood up. He stood in front of 40 of his own tenants, with the sleet coming against the windows behind him, and he opened his mouth and nothing came out of it. Nora watched her husband's hands. They had begun to shake, and he put them behind him. The silence went on. It went on for about 20 seconds, which is a very long time in a church. The Duke sat down. "Thank you, Your Grace," said Mr. Threlkeld gently, and moved on to the accounts of the surveyor of highways. Nora sat in the dark pew and understood that the case had just been won in front of 40 witnesses, and that in 6 months, every one of those men would be asked on oath what they had seen, and every one of them would tell the truth. She found him at 11 that night in the walled garden. High at a hedging hook, and he was going at a dead pear tree on the south wall. He had his coat off in December, and his shirt was stuck to his back, and he was taking the arms off at the wall in strokes that would have had a man's leg off. He turned with the hook still up. "Go inside," he said. His chest was going like a bellows. "No, Honora." "I read it," said Nora. He lowered the hook. "I read it in the library on the 9th, and I have had it about me since. 4:30. In square 3 times. The cuirassiers on the right. You gave the order in your own voice." The hook went out of his hand into the wet. "Then you know what I am," he said. "I know what you did. It is the same thing." "It is not said." Nora, and her voice came out louder than she intended and went round the walls. "He told you. He wrote it down that he told you, and then he took his company out into the open ground anyway, because he was ordered. And because he was 24, and because he was better than he had any need to be. He knew before he went, and he went." Lucian Fenwick stood in the sleet and did not move. "That is the last thing my brother did on this earth," said Nora. "He knew the line would break, and he stood in it. Do not take it away from him by making it your doing. He would think you were stealing from him." Something in the man's face came apart. She had expected weeping. What happened was worse and quieter. He simply stopped holding whatever he had been holding level for 5 years and stood there with it spilled all round him and looked at her. Then he crossed the 4 feet between them and took her face in both hands, filthy and cold and shaking, and stopped there with his thumbs against her jaw, giving her the whole of 1 second to step back. Nora did not step back. The kiss was not a courtship. It was a collision at the bottom of a hill. She came up into it with the whole of 5 years of being told to be small and quiet and useful, and he made a sound against her mouth that she felt in her own chest. When they broke apart, he put his forehead against hers and kept it there, and neither of them said anything in the sleet in a dead garden in the dark. It happened that night, and it was nothing like the thing girls are told about. It was cold and clumsy. I was marked all down the left side, a seam under the ribs from something that had gone in and been taken out again, and a pale, burnt web over the shoulder blade. Josie said when she touched it, "The breach. Do not." "You are alive," said Nora fiercely, and pulled him down. Afterwards, with the rain going along the gutter above the window, he lay with his face in her hair and his arm across her like a man holding a door shut, and his breathing went slow, and for the first time in 14 months, Honora Thorne fell asleep without counting anything. She woke at 5:30. The fire was down to a red seam. The bed beside her was cold. Howe was at the window, fully dressed boots and all, with his back to the room, and there was a letter in his hand that had been opened. "Lucian," she said. "You should go back to your own rooms," he said, "before the house is up." It went through her like cold water. She got out of the bed and put her feet on the boards and got the shawl round her and said, "Look at me." He turned. The candle was behind him, and she could not see his face properly and did not need to. "Cardew has written," he said. "The commission is granted. It is set for the summer assize week at Wakefield." She waited. "It was a mistake," said the Duke. "Last night. It was mine, and it was a mistake, and it will not happen again." "Say why," said Nora. "Not that. Why?" "Because if they find against me," he said, and his voice was completely level, "then any child born to this house after the date of that commission is a child born to a lunatic, and my cousin's counsel will stand up in chancery and say so, and that child becomes a ward of the court before it is weaned. And you who in law do not exist will not be permitted to be a party to the proceedings in which it is done. I will not put a child in the middle of this, and I have already put you there." Nora stood in the cold room in a shawl and looked at her husband. She understood him perfectly. That was the trouble. He was not being cruel, and he was not lying, and every word of it was probably correct. "You would rather lose well," she said, "than win badly." He did not answer. "That is not nobility," said Nora. "That is the most expensive kind of cowardice there is, and you can afford it. and the 411 families in this valley cannot. And she walked past him and out with her head up, and nothing on but a shawl, and left him standing at the window with the candle guttering behind him. Mr. Hollis Cardew was 68 and had been 31 years at Lincoln's Inn before his chest drove him north, and he lived now in a narrow house in Wakefield, with a bad fire and 4,000 books. Lucian had retained him in January, and had then gone back to the decanter, which was the last piece of estate business he transacted for 4 months. Nora went to see him on her own account on the 20th of January, 1817, with 11 pages in her own writing, setting out the whole of the Netherfold transaction, the prices and the names of the 19 men who had been in the barn. Mr. Cardew read all 11 pages without saying anything. Then he put his hand flat on top of them, which she understood to be an act of respect. "This is very good work," he said. "Then it will answer." "It will not be admitted," said Mr. Cardew. He put a piece of coal on the fire and took a long time about it. "Your Grace," he said, "do you know what the law says you are?" "I am told I am my husband." That is the schoolroom version, and it is very nearly accurate. In law, a wife and a husband are one person, and that person is the husband. You cannot make a contract. Your earnings are his. That ring is his. "And my evidence." "Inadmissible," said Cardew. "A wife may not give evidence for her husband nor against him." He looked at her over his spectacles. It has the additional convenience of putting a great deal of what happens inside a marriage permanently beyond the reach of a court. "So there is nothing I can do," said Nora. "There is nothing you can do in a courtroom," said Mr. Cardew. "That is a much smaller thing than you suppose. You may not be heard, Your Grace, but there is no statute in England that forbids a woman to find out." Nora looked at him. "Find out what?" "Whatever there is," said Cardew. "A case is not won by the man who argues best. It is won by whoever walks into that room holding a piece of paper the other side did not know still existed." He handed her 11 pages back. "You will not be permitted to speak." Nobody has ever stopped a woman from reading. She began that week. There was a night in February when Lucian came in at 1 in the morning, and she heard the decanter go over on the boards, and she lay in her own bed and listened to him swearing at it, and she did not get up. She had spent 5 months trying to haul a man out of a hole with her hands. It had not worked, and while she had been doing it, a lawyer in a clean shirt had been quietly building a case that would take the roof off 411 houses. "Let him drink," she thought. "I will go and get the paper." She started a second notebook. The first was still the register book. The second was headed with a name, Threlkeld, and under it in the same ruled columns she had used all her life for money, date, place, sum, from whom to whom, who saw it. Dr. Ambrose Pell kept his house on the Wakefield Road, 2 miles out of Huddersfield, behind a wall with broken glass on it. Nora went on the 4th of March in a hired gig in her plainest bonnet and gave a false name in a true problem. She was Mrs. Barrow of Halifax, and she had an aunt. Pell was 52 and soft. Then he was called to the door and left her in the little office. Nora had 6 minutes. On the shelf was a ledger marked Certificates and Attendances. She got it down and found the letter W and ran her finger to Warrow. 11 attendances in 2 years. Every one of them dated on a quarter day. Every one with the same note against it. Attended at Ellerbeck. Report furnished. Nora put the ledger back and sat down and had a proposition ready by the time Pell came in. "Dr. Pell," she said, "I am not Mrs. Barrow of Halifax. He went the color of a candle. I am the Duchess of Warrow, and I have just read your attendance book. You have entered 11 visits to my husband at Ellerbeck Hall in 2 years. In that period, he was in the house for a total of 6 months. He was in London, or at Harrogate, or at the sea for the rest of it, and I have the household books to prove where, and I have written out the dates and left them with a gentleman in Wakefield." Pell sat down without being asked. "I have not falsified," he said. "I attended." "You attended," said Nora, "an empty room." He said nothing. "Who pays you?" she said. "The estate. The estate pays me. The estate pays you 6 guineas the quarter, and has done since March 1812, and my husband did not come home until the September of 1815, so the estate did not begin it. Was it Mr. Crispin Fenwick?" And this was the moment. She had come there certain of the answer, and she had the next 4 questions ready, and she never asked any of them. Because Ambrose Pell looked up with an expression of genuine wretched confusion and said, "Mr. Fenwick. Mr. Crispin Fenwick." "Mr. Fenwick has never paid me a shilling in his life," said Pell. "Mr. Fenwick thinks he does. He is told he does. There is a line in his own accounts for it, and I have seen it." He stopped. "I have said more than I should." "Then who?" "I do not know," said the doctor, and for the first time he sounded frightened rather than embarrassed. "I am paid by a bill drawn on a house in Huddersfield, and endorsed by a gentleman I have met twice, and I am told what to write, and I write it, and I have never in my life asked the question you are asking because the last man who did is not practicing." Nora drove back over the moor in the dark. "Mr. Fenwick thinks he does." She had been in that valley 6 months, and had spent every one of them certain that she knew who the enemy was, and she had been certain because a competent, decent, ruined man had told her a true thing about her husband at the bottom of a staircase in October. The winter was the worst anybody could remember, and there was no part of it that was not made worse by somebody in London. Bread was 13 pence the quartern loaf in January, and did not come down. In December, a meeting at Spa Fields had turned into a riot, and a gunsmith's shop was broken open, and after that everything in the country hardened at once. On the 4th of March, the Habeas Corpus Act was suspended, which meant any man in England could be taken up on suspicion and held without charge for as long as the government cared to hold him. At the end of the month, it became unlawful for more than 50 persons to meet without notice to a magistrate. In the home valley, the gig mills went on running and the bread went on rising, and men began to meet at night on the moor edge in numbers of 49. Nora heard about it because Jonas Sowerby told her in the Netherfold barn with his hat in his hands in the manner of a man discharging a debt he had not been asked for. "There is talk, ma'am," he said. "I would not have you hear it first from a soldier." "What talk?" "That there is a rising coming in June," said Sowerby. "That it is general. That Nottingham is out, and Birmingham is out, and there is a provisional government waiting in London for the word, and that all we are wanted to do is walk into Huddersfield and take the barracks, and it will be done by morning, and there will be a new parliament by Michaelmas." "Who tells them that?" Sowerby looked at the floor. "There is a man comes up from Leeds," he said, "and there is money. That is the part I do not like, ma'am. There is money going about among men who have none, and it is not being lent." On a night in the 3rd week of February, Nora had already seen the money. She had stopped at the wagon at Honley to have the mare's shoe seen to, and through the crack of the door she had watched Mr. Ossian Threlkeld sit at a corner table with 3 cloth dressers and count out coin. Not much. A pound, perhaps 30 shillings, split 3 ways. He did it neatly with his gloves off, and he talked while he did it, and once he laughed at something one of them said. Nora had gone home and written it in the 2nd notebook, and under it her conclusion which she would have cause to read again in June. "I was buying witnesses for the commission. It was Mr. Cardew who told her she was wrong, and he did it in April, and he did it without any relish at all. She had brought him the Huddersfield bill. Pell had given it up in the end, or rather had allowed her to copy it while looking pointedly out of the window, and it was drawn on a banking house in Huddersfield and endorsed on the back in a small clerkly hand. Cardew looked at the endorsement for a long time. "Do you know this name?" said Nora. "I know it," said Cardew. "He is a corn factor in Wakefield, and he has been the letter carrier for the Home Department in this county for 6 years. Everything that goes south about the disaffected in the West, writing, goes through his hands, and everything that comes north with money in it comes back through them." Nora sat very still. "You are telling me that Dr. Pell has been paid out of Secret Service money." "I am telling you what the endorsement has said, Cardew." "Then I will tell you," said Nora. And she put it together on his hearthrug in about 4 minutes out loud, while an old barrister sat with his fingers together and did not interrupt her once. Threlkeld had been going to Crispin Fenwick's house since 1811. The payments to Pell began in March 1812. Both of those were before Lucian came home, and both of them were before Crispin had any conceivable reason to want his cousin declared a lunatic, because in 1811 Crispin was a solvent man with the whole running of a great estate in his hands and no earthly need of it. The commission had not been got up by Crispin Fenwick. It had been got up around him. He had been given a grievance and a grief and an attorney and a doctor, and had been walked to the edge of it over 5 years by a man who had made himself indispensable to both sides of the family at once. And when the Halifax Bank went down in June 1816 and took every penny Crispin had, the last thing needed had been supplied by accident. "And a rising," said Nora. Cardew raised his head. "Say that again." "A rising," said Nora. "In June. On this estate. 400 armed men walking through the Warrow lands to Huddersfield, with a duke sitting up at Ellerbeck who cannot keep order in his own valley." She was on her feet. "Mr. Cardew, what is the 4th article?" "Waste of the estate." "And what will the 5th be when it is amended in June?" "That the said duke suffered his own tenants to arm and combine and march, and did not know of it and could not prevent it." She put her hands on the back of the chair. "There is no answer to that. There is no paper I can find that answers that. If those men walk, the commission is decided before it sits." "And if his grace calls out the yeomanry and stops them," said Cardew slowly, "there will be dead men in the beck, and the same article will read that he set cavalry on his own tenantry." "Yes," said Nora. "Either way," said Cardew. "Either way," said Nora. "And in either case, the estate goes into chancery, and the estate and chancery must have an attorney to conduct its business before the masters, and that attorney is paid out of the estate by order of the court every year for as long as the duke lives." Mr. Cardew took his spectacles off. "I have known Ossian Threlkeld 30 years, he said. "I have never once heard anything against him." "No," said Nora. "That is rather the point, is it not? He came to Ellerbeck himself on the 19th of May with perfect courtesy to give notice of the documents he would call for. I sat in the small drawing room and drank the tea Nora poured him, and told her as a professional matter that at the hearing he would move for the production of the Duke's military correspondence, all of it, and particularly any letters written to him in the field in the June of 1815. Nora's hand did not move on the pot. "There is a good deal of it," she said. "There is one item," said Mr. Threlkeld pleasantly. "I have the description of it from a sergeant of the 9th Company who was on the ground and saw it taken up. I shall be asking for it by name." He put down his cup and thanked her and went away. Mr. Cardew's answer came by the next post and was 4 lines long. "Anything destroyed after the commission issues is a contempt and will be treated as an admission. The commission issues on the 22nd. You have 3 days. They burned it on the 21st of May at 11 at night in the library with the shutters closed. Nora did not steal it, and she did not surprise him with it. She had thought about doing both and had decided that if she did, she would spend the rest of her life married to a man she had done it to. She put the folded paper on the table between them and lit the candles. "I am going to read this aloud," she said, "and then I am going to tell you what I think, and then you will do what you think." He said nothing. She read it. She read the ink first. The 15th of June. The road above Braine-le-Comte. The captain who owed him money, the pair of boots that had not come. Then she turned it over and read the pencil, the whole of it 4:30. The square, the cuirassiers on the right, the order given in his own voice. And then she read the last part, which she had not read to him in the garden in December, because in December it had not been hers to give. "If I do not come off this field, do not let Nora go into the workhouse. She is too proud to ask and too clever to be pitied. And for God's sake, do not spend the rest of your life at it. Drink a pint for me. Marry somebody who makes you laugh and live long enough to get fat and dull." The fire made the only noise in the room. "If I keep it said, Nora Threlkeld puts it in front of 12 men in Wakefield in 3 weeks and reads out 4 lines in the hand of a dead lieutenant that say you were told and did it anyway. And Article the 3rd proves itself, and there is no answer to it. If I burn it after the 22nd, it is a contempt, and it is as good as a confession. It goes tonight, or it does not go at all." She pushed it across the table. "It is the last thing of his there is," she said. "It is yours before it is mine. You may stop me, and I will not say another word about it as long as I live." Lucian Fenwick looked at the paper for a long time. Then he picked it up himself and stood and walked to the fire and put it in. The paper was dry and old, and it went almost at once. It caught along the folded edge, and the pencil lines went first going brown and then black, and the ink lasted a moment longer, and then the whole of it lifted off the coals in one piece, the way burnt paper does, and went up the chimney. And then the Duke of Warrow made a sound that Nora had never heard a grown man make, and his legs went, and he came down on the hearthrug on his knees. Nora went down after him. She got her arms round him and pulled his head into her shoulder and held it there, and he shook, and it went on for a long time. 5 years came out of him on that rug. She did not say anything at all because there was nothing to say, and she had the sense not to invent something. The fire burned down. The ash went up. Somewhere in the house a clock struck 1 and then 2. In the morning he was calm and clean-shaven and entirely hollow. He came into the estate room and stood by the window and said, without turning round, that he had nothing of Gideon left now. Nora put down her pen. She did not tell him it was all right, because it was not. She did not tell him he had done the necessary thing, because he had, and it was no comfort whatever. "You have," she said, "you do not know it yet." Then she went back to her column of figures and let him stand there, and she did not explain, and he did not ask. She was in Wakefield twice more before the end of May. The first time she went to the office of the clerk of the peace and asked to see the land tax assessments for the township of Ellerbeck, and was told that of course she might, they were public, and was given a chair and a very dirty book. The second time she went to the West Riding Registry of Deeds, which had stood in that town since 1704 and was one of only 4 such offices in England, and where every conveyance affecting land in the riding was entered as a matter of course by every attorney in the county, because that was how it had been done for 113 years. She copied out 2 documents in full in her own hand. She did not entirely understand what she had. She took the copies to Mr. Cardew on the 31st of May, and the old man read the first page and stopped and read it again, and took his spectacles off and looked at the ceiling for half a minute. "Is it of any use?" said Nora. "Your Grace," said Mr. Cardew, "I am going to ask you to do something that will be very difficult. I am going to ask you not to tell your husband, and not to tell me again in writing, and to go home and say nothing whatever to anybody until the 12th of June. "Why?" "Because I have been at this trade 40 years, said Cardew. "You do not show a man the hole in his own floor while he is still standing on the other side of the room." Sowerby came up to the house at 9 o'clock on the night of the 1st of June and would not come inside. "They are meeting at 11 at the Dean Head," he said. 400 near enough. They go down the valley at 2 in the morning and cross the beck at Netherfold Ford, and they are for the barracks at Huddersfield by daylight. Lucian was already reaching for his coat. "Ma'am," said Sowerby, not moving, "my brother-in-law is in it." Nora looked at her husband. He had come alive in about 11 seconds. The slackness had gone out of his face, and his hands were steady for the first time since December. "The upper Agbrig troop," he said. "Wooldale, Honley, and Meltham. 40 sabres. I can have them at the ford by 1. "And then," said Nora, "then I will put them across the road and stop it. They are your own tenants." "They are 400 armed men," said the Duke, "and I have stood in front of that before. And there is one way it is done." "Yes," said Nora. "And there will be 9 or 10 dead in the beck, and they will be hanged at York in the autumn, and Threlkeld will read the coroner's inquisition to 12 men in Wakefield in 11 days. Lucian stopped with his arm in his coat. "I has been paying them," said Nora. "I saw him do it at the wagon at Honley in February. The man from Leeds who tells them Nottingham is out is his. There is no rising in Nottingham, and there is no provisional government in London, and there is nobody coming." The room was very quiet. "Then it is a trap either way," said Lucian. "Yes. If I go, there are dead men. If I do not go, 400 of my tenants walk into a barracks full of regulars at daybreak and are shot there instead, and the same thing is written on the same page." "Yes," said Nora, and took the granary keys off the nail by the door. He looked at the keys and then at her. "No," he said. "There is a third thing," said Nora. "It cannot be done by a man on a horse with 40 sabres behind him. It has to be done by somebody they cannot possibly be afraid of." "Honora, you will keep the yeomanry in the yard at Wooldale," she said, putting on her cloak, "and you will not move them, whatever you hear, until it is light. That is the hard part. And it is yours." She took the gig, and she took a lantern, and she went down the valley alone. The Netherfold Ford is where the beck runs wide over gravel, below the barn, and the road comes down to it in a cut between 2 walls, so that a body of men coming through has to come through narrow 4 or 5 abreast and cannot go round. Nora put the gig across the road at the bottom of the cut, took the mare out of the shafts and turned her loose in the field and stood in front of it with the lantern. She was there 50 minutes before she heard them. She heard them long before she saw them. The front rank came into the lantern light and stopped, and the stopping went back through the column in a ripple, and there was a very long silence in which 400 men looked at one woman holding up a light. Sowerby was in the third rank. She had known he would be. "Jonas Sowerby," said Nora, and her voice came out of her steady, which she had not counted on. "Come here." I came. She held out the keys. "The Netherfold granary is open from now," she said. "It is open, and it stays open until harvest." Sowerby did not take the keys. "Ma'am," he said, "we are told there is a general rising." "I know what you are told," said Nora. "Take the keys." I took them. And then Honora Warrow did the thing she had come to do. "I have no right to do this," she said. Nobody moved. "I want that said first, because you will hear it said about me later. I am a married woman. In the law of England, I do not exist. If I stood in a court tomorrow and swore to every word I am about to say, no judge in this kingdom would be permitted to listen to me. So I am not standing here on any right. I am standing here because I have the key and you are hungry, and I would rather be wrong than careful." Somewhere in the middle of the column a man laughed once and stopped. "Now," said Nora, and took out the second notebook and turned it to the light. "I am going to read you some dates." She read them. The 4th of February, at the wagon, at Honley, in the passage by the tap room, £1 11 shillings, counted out on a corner table, and the names of the 3 men who took it, all 3 of them, standing in that column, and one of them in the second rank. The 11th of March at Marsden, the 2nd of April at the Rose and Crown at Netherthong, £2 of which 15 shillings went to the carter who brought the pikes down from Leeds in a load of hurdles. And the name at the top of every entry, "Mr. Ossian Threlkeld," she said, "attorney at law of Chancery Lane, and of this parish, who has been in the pay of the Home Department these 6 years, and who is paid by the head for what he can prove about you." She let that stand a moment. "I is not going to Huddersfield with you," said Nora. "There is no rising at Nottingham. The Habeas Corpus Act was suspended in March, and every man who walks into that town at daybreak can be taken up and held without a charge until it suits somebody to bring one." She closed the book. The first man to break the line was a man near the front whom Nora never afterwards identified. He did not shout. He simply turned round in the dark and began to walk back up the road, and the sound of it was one pair of clogs going the wrong way against 400. It did not go all at once, and the ones who came past her going up the valley did not look at her, and she understood that this was not fear and was not gratitude, and that she had done something to those men that would take them longer to forgive than a cavalry charge. Nobody fired. Nobody was hurt. At Wooldale, 4 miles off, 40 men of the Upper Agbrig Yeomanry sat their horses in a farmyard from 1 until 4:30 with their carbines loaded, and their commanding officer stood at the gate and did nothing, which was the hardest order Lucian Fenwick ever gave in his life. At 2 in the mornings on the 9th of June, on the other side of the hill, several hundred men came down out of the villages above Huddersfield with pikes and met a picket of yeomanry near Follyhall Bridge. In Derbyshire, at almost the same hour, another few hundred walked out of Pentrick towards Nottingham on the word of a man from London, and were met by dragoons, and by the autumn 3 of them would be hanged and beheaded in front of the county jail at Derby. For 3 days, everybody in the West Riding believed the country was coming apart. The commission sat on the 12th of June, 1817, in the long room of the Old Bell Inn at Wakefield. There was a commissioner in lunacy sent down from London. There were 12 men of the county sworn on a jury. There was Mr. Threlkeld for the petitioner, and Mr. Cardew for the Duke, and Mr. Crispin Fenwick sitting at the petitioner's table in a black coat with his hands flat on his knees. And there was the Duke himself seated in the middle of the room, where everybody could see him and required to stay there, while a room full of strangers discussed whether he was a person. Nora sat at the back next to nobody. Mr. Threlkeld was very brief, and it was much worse than if he had not been. Ha put in 11 certificates of Dr. Ambrose Pell of Huddersfield, attending upon the said Duke at Ellerbeck, dated on the quarter days over 2 years, each one recording nightly disturbance of the reason. He called Mrs. Otley, housekeeper aged 57, who was sworn and then cried and was not able to go on, and was thanked and released. He established that the Duke had not taken his seat since 1815, received nobody, and answered no correspondence. He came to the granary, 1,100 quarters of merchantable wheat, the property of the estate, disposed of in a season of dearth at 15 shillings under the market. He called 2 ratepayers and the parish clerk to the vestry of the 12th of December, and asked each the same question, which was whether the Duke had been asked a plain question in open vestry and had been unable to answer it, and each of them said yes. And then Mr. Threlkeld came to the marriage. He put it with regret. That was the craft of it. That in August 1816, the Duke had gone alone to a lodging house in Southwark, a place he had never entered before, and had proposed marriage within a quarter of an hour to a woman of 29 whom he had never met, who had no fortune, no connection, and no expectation, and had married her 4 days later in an empty church, and that the jury might ask themselves whether that was the act of a man in the government of his own reason. Nora sat at the back of the room and listened to a lawyer prove her husband mad out of the fact of her, and the Duke of Warrow stood up. Mr. Cardew put a hand out and did not get to him in time. "You may say what you like about me," said Lucian Fenwick to the commissioner in the voice he had used on a hillside above Badajoz. "Say I could not answer in the vestry, that is true also, and I have thought about it every night since." The room had gone entirely silent. "But you will not use my wife." There was a pause of the kind that has weather in it. "Sit down, your grace." And it was noted afterwards by more than one person in that room that a man who had been described for 3 hours as incapable of governing himself had just stood up, spoken to the point, and sat down when told to. Mr. Cardew rose and asked leave to call her Grace the Duchess of Warrow. Mr. Threlkeld objected. A wife was not a competent witness either for her husband or against him. The rule was of great antiquity. The commissioner regretted that the objection was good. Nora had known it would come and had thought she was ready for it, and found that she was not. She sat in the heat at the back of the room and was not permitted to say one word about her own life. So she leaned forward and put a packet of papers into Mr. Cardew's hand. Mr. Cardew asked leave to put in 3 documents. The first was the marriage settlement of the 20th of August, 1816. The second was a certified copy of the memorial of that settlement entered in the West Riding Registry of Deeds at Wakefield on the 3rd of September, 1816, at the instance of the attorney who prepared it in the ordinary course, as every conveyance affecting land in this riding had been entered since 1704. The third was the land tax assessment for the township of Ellerbeck, kept by the clerk of the peace for the year, beginning at Michaelmas, 1816. Mr. Cardew asked the commissioner to turn to the second schedule, and the room, which had been half asleep in the heat, sat up, because the second schedule of that settlement conveyed the Netherfold parcel, being the home farm, the barn, the granary, and 42 acres upon the beck, to trustees to hold to the sole and separate use of Honora Duchess of Warrow, free from the controlled debts and engagements of her said husband. The granary at Netherfold said, Mr. Cardew was not the property of the estate. It has not been the property of the estate since the 20th of August, 1816. It was her separate property in equity. A man cannot waste what he does not own. The fourth article is not weak. It is impossible. Mr. Threlkeld got up and said something about a memorial being a mere formality. Mr. Cardew said that he was obliged to his friend for the observation, and that the memorial had been entered on the 3rd of September, 1816, by the clerk of Mr. Threlkeld's own office, in Mr. Threlkeld's own hand at the foot, and that he held the certificate of the registrar. Then he read out the land tax assessment. Netherfold, 42 acres and buildings. Proprietor Honora Duchess of Warrow in her own right. Entered at Michaelmas, 1866, 9 weeks before the granary was opened, in a public book in an office in that town, 300 yards from where they were all sitting. And Mr. Cardew observed mildly that his learned friend had that morning tendered to the jury upon his own responsibility as an officer of the court a sworn statement that the granary was the property of the settled estate, and that either that statement was false, or the settlement he had himself drawn and registered was false, and that both of them carried his signature. Mr. Ossian Threlkeld said nothing at all. There remained one difficulty, and the commissioner put his finger on it at once. A deed of settlement produced by the party it favors proves nothing by itself. It required to be verified, and the person to verify it was the surviving trustee. The surviving trustee was named at the foot of the second schedule, Crispin Fenwick. He got up slowly. He had brought it and paid for it and believed in it. "Are you Crispin Fenwick?" Crispin looked at the sheet for a long moment. "That is my hand," he said. "And did you know what you were signing?" The room waited. No, said Crispin Fenwick. "I signed it in a room in Chancery Lane in August of last year, and I did not read a line of it because my bank had gone down in the June and I had not slept in 2 months." He looked up and he looked at Lucian and not at the jury. "My cousin signed the same way. He always did. That is how it is done in our family." He turned back to the commissioner. "But it is my hand, and the deed is good, and the granary is hers." He sat down. And that was the end of it, although it took another hour. Jonas Sowerby and 11 other tenants of the estate were called and asked about the night of the 1st of June, and gave their account of it and were cross-examined and did not shift. And the commissioner asked the question that nobody in the room could answer. "If the government of this estate is in nobody's hands," he said, "will somebody explain to me how 400 armed men were turned back at Netherfold Ford on the 1st of June, without a shot fired, when 4 miles away, on the 8th, the yeomanry could do nothing but shoot?" The jury were out 20 minutes. They found that Lucian Fenwick, Duke of Warrow, was of sound mind and capable of the government of himself and his estate. The commission was superseded. Mr. Threlkeld was not permitted to leave the town that night. The matter of the 2 sworn statements went from the commissioner to the master of the rolls, and there began the long business that ended with his name struck off the roll of attorneys the following spring. But that was not what finished him. On the 14th of June, 2 days after the hearing, the Leeds Mercury printed the first of its articles upon the government spies in the northern counties and named a man called Oliver and said who had paid him. How was ruined not because a duchess had read a book. He was ruined because he had been standing on the wrong side of the country in the wrong week of the wrong year, and Nora thought that was probably the most honest ending he could have had. Crispin Fenwick came to Ellerbeck once more in July and stayed 11 minutes. He said that he had been wrong, and that being sincerely wrong was not better than being dishonest, and in some ways was a good deal worse, and that he would not trouble them again. He was still ruined. The Halifax Bank paid 3 shillings and 4 in the pound in the end. Cecily was 19 and had no portion, and a young man in Halifax whose mother had begun to speak of the difficulties. Nora let Netherfold to her. She did it herself in her own name on her own paper, without her husband's signature anywhere upon it, because 42 acres and a granary on the beck were the one thing in England that belonged to Honora Warrow, and not to the Duke of Warrow. The rent she fixed at a figure that would give the girl 300 a year and a settlement of her own when she married, drawn to her sole and separate use in the usual form. She did not do it because she had forgiven Crispin Fenwick. She did it because she had once stood in a room in Southwark with 2 pounds, 4 shillings in her brother's shirts and 3 piles. And she was not going to be the reason another woman had to learn to count like that. In April of 1818, the weather came back. Nobody who was there ever quite got over it. After 2 years of that gray, the spring of 1818 was almost indecent, and the whole valley went about half stunned in it, and the wheat went in on dry ground for the first time since 1815. Nora stood in the Ellerbeck stable yard on a Tuesday morning with the hem of her walking dress already past, saving holding a board and a pencil checking off a wagon. 6 casks of lime, she said. 4 sacks of black oats for seed, and they have sent no harness. I shall write to the man at Halifax, and he will not enjoy it. I pity him, said Lucian from the stable door. He came across the yard. He was in his working coat with a smear of cart grease along his jaw, and he had put on a stone and a half since Christmas, and there was nothing under his eyes at all. The Holland sow is running, he said. The whole of the East Headland is dry. We shall have a crop this year that does not rot standing in it. It is remarkable what money and attention will do, said Nora, not looking up. I took the pencil out of her hand. I was using that. You are always using that, said the Duke, and put it on the wagon bed. Nora looked at him. There was a letter this morning, he said, from my aunt at Scarborough, who has heard everything 6 months late and has views. and there was one for you. I gave it to her. It was from the agents in Craig's Court. Nora opened it standing in the mud. 34 pounds, 11 shillings and 6 pence arrears of pay and share of prize money due to the late Lieutenant Gideon Thorne, the claimant having at length produced a certificate of baptism. She had got it out of the bishop's transcripts at York in February. It had taken her 22 months, 9 letters, 2 journeys, and 1 afternoon in a cold room with a clerk who had told her 4 times that the thing did not exist and had then gone and found it. Nobody had got it for her. I shall put it into the seed fund, she said. It will buy oats for the whole of the upper valley, and there will be 4 shillings over. He did not tell her to keep it for herself, which she noticed and was glad of. Honora, he said. She looked up. I dragged you into a carriage in Southwark because I was going under and I wanted something to hold on to, he said. I do not want an anchor. I want a wife, and I want this one. He put his hands on her arms. I love you. It is extremely inconvenient, and I am fairly sure you are going to ruin me with lime and iron, and I love you. Nora put the board down on the wagon. I have something for you, she said. It is not a thing. Stand still. And she stood in the middle of the stable yard in the sun, in front of 2 grooms and a carter and a wagon, half unloaded, and she said it from the beginning. The 15th of June, 1815. The road above Braine-le-Comte. The captain who owed him 3 shillings and the boots that never came, and the weather and the joke about the Belgian horses. All of it in her brother's spelling and her brother's order without one word out of place. And then the pencil. 4:30. In square 3 times. The cuirassiers on the right. The order given in his own voice. And then the end of it. Do not let Nora go into the workhouse. Drink a pint for me. Marry somebody who makes you laugh and live long enough to get fat and dull. Lucian Fenwick stood in the middle of his own stable yard and did not move. I read it once, said Nora. In the library in December, by 1 candle. I have never forgotten a column of figures in my life, and I did not forget that either, and I have had it in my head every day since. She put her hand flat on his chest. I did not take him away from you, she said. I was carrying him. He got hold of her by the arms and could not speak for a moment. Then he said, unevenly, that she was the most terrifying woman in the West riding, and kissed her in the mud in front of the grooms, under a sky that was the plain, ordinary blue of an April morning with nothing remarkable about it at all. It was not an escape, and it was not a rescue, and neither of them had been saved by the other, which is a thing that happens rather less often than the ballads suggest. It was 2 people who had each gone into a room alone, done the difficult thing, and come out. The wheat that year went 11 bushels to the acre above the beck.